Hey guys, tonight we slide into a frigid little turf house on the edge of the world. No heating, no electricity, and definitely no TikTok. You're bundled in sheepskin, your breath forming little ghosts in the air, and the wind outside sounds like it's trying to peel the roof off. Your fingers ache just from existing, your toes. You haven't felt them since breakfast. And yet, this is when you whisper a line of verse. Not for school, not for likes, but because that's how you keep your soul from freezing. You're about to learn how bored, half-frozen medieval Icelanders pass the time by crafting poetry so layered and cryptic it could roast someone better than a fireplace. Of course, you probably won't survive this winter, but hey, at least your rhymes might. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you notice is the quiet. It's not peaceful quiet. It's eerie. The kind of quiet that presses on your ears and makes your own heartbeat sound like a drum. Snowdrifts mound up against the turf walls of your house, sealing you in like a tomb. The doorway's covered in a hanging sealskin, and outside, it's just wind, ice, and darkness. You're somewhere in 13th century Iceland, in the heart of winter, and every part of you would really prefer to be in 13th century Spain instead. Inside, your home is no medieval castle. It's a low, cramped, earthy rectangle. Thick turf bricks make up the walls, and the roof is basically more grass, stitched together with driftwood beams salvaged from shipwrecks. Iceland doesn't exactly have trees anymore. Too many settlers got happy. Historians still argue whether deforestation was entirely the settlers' fault or a cruel combo of sheep and climate change. Either way, your house smells like damp wool, boiled fish, and the faint tang of burning sheep dung. And it's not just you. Your whole extended family is packed in here, swaddled like burritos in layers of animal skin. You hear the snoring of your uncle in the next sleeping alcove, the occasional fart from the dog under the bench, and the rhythmic slosh of someone stirring a pot of lamb broth. So, what do you do to stay sane in the endless night? You recite, you compose, you rhyme. There's a little oil lamp glowing in the corner. Nothing romantic, just sheep fat and moss. You sit cross-legged, your cloak pulled tight, and start murmuring a line about snow that bites like Odin's wolf. Not bad. You mutter another, shaping it into a 4-line stanza, a tiny shelter built of rhythm and metaphor. Poetry here isn't some elite pastime. It's how you kill time. It's how you impress the girl who churns butter without ever looking up. It's how you teach your son not to touch the hot iron without sounding like a nag. It's literally a survival tool, because with this much darkness, boredom could crush your soul like an avalanche. And don't forget, there's no paper. No pens. You're not writing anything down. You're holding it all in your head. A full verse, a whole saga sometimes. Icelandic poetry is oral tradition on hard mode. The sagas won't get written down for another century or so, but the bones of them, the rhythm, the phrases, the tone, they're born right here in these freezing rooms. By the way, the kind of poetry you're whispering isn't freeform. Oh no. Icelanders don't do lazy. You're composing in drakviti, the court meter. Each line has a fixed number of syllables, strict rules for alliteration, and these little flavor crystals called kennings. Kennings are poetic riddles, like calling the sea the whale road, or a sword the wound ice. They sound cool, sure, but they also help you remember stuff. Memory loves a weird turn of phrase. And maybe the real reason you're whispering poetry is because it's the only thing you control. The ice is bigger than you. The wind laughs at your fences. But a line of verse, that's yours. It's also the only way you might get remembered, because someday someone might pass it on. Around a fire, or across the sea. Fringe fact. Some Icelanders back then believed that especially beautiful poetry had magical power. Like, you could literally make someone fall in love with you or curse them into sickness. With the right combination of kennings, try fitting that into a Valentine's Day card. So here you are, rocking slightly on your haunches, composing in the cold. The wind howls louder, the dog shifts and sighs, someone coughs. And then, silence again, except for your voice, steady, rhythmic, tracing patterns in the dark. You glance at the lamp. The sheep, fat is low. You'll have to add more, or it'll go out. And if it does, the dark won't be poetic, it'll be real. Still, you stay a moment longer, adjusting a line, something about frost like a silver curse. You say it again. It feels good. It fits. You're not just warming your mind. You're keeping the light on. One verse at a time. The lamp's still sputtering, casting a greasy halo over the low beams above your head when someone pulls back the sealskin flap to toss in a bundle of soggy driftwood. The smell of sea salt and rot hits your nose like a wet slap. You wrinkle it. This is your firewood for the week. Welcome to Iceland, where there are no trees. Well, that's not entirely true. Some scraggly birch still clings to the soil like it owes the lava money. But once upon a time, this island was much greener. Early settlers, mostly Norwegians, chopped down vast forests to build homes, ships, and warm their toes. But the soil was thin, volcanic, and easily eroded. Add a few centuries of sheep chewing everything in sight, and voiled. You now burn bones and seaweed for heat. Historians still argue whether the deforestation was a slow death or a rapid slash and burn disaster. What's certain is this: you need to get creative to survive. And that includes how you make ink.
Yes, ink.
Because though you mostly compose poetry in your head, there are moments when someone with a little more status and a lot more patience wants to write it down. For that, you need tools. Icelandic scribes scraped ink together from soot, crushed minerals, and even boiled lichen. Sometimes they used iron salts for deep blacks or whale oil for smoother texture. Paper? Ha! Try vellum calfskin, stretched thin and scraped until it's smoother than your best idea. You watch your cousin dig through a leather pouch and pull out what passes for a pen. A sharpened goose feather, dipped in a Grammy mix that smells like eggs and burnt rock. He's copying your verse, or maybe just doodling battle axes. Either way, he's doing it by the flicker of a lamp that could go out at any second. No pressure. You help by holding a chunk of whale vertebra steady. It makes a surprisingly stable desk. Every scrap matters. This is not the kind of place where you crumple a page and toss it. Each word has to count. Still, you're amazed by how many people around you know the basics of poetry. It's not some elite, spewing monk's hobby. Kids learn rhyme forms with the same urgency they learn not to step into freezing rivers. It's survival through structure, warmth through words, and because there are no trees, there's also a strange intimacy to everything. You feel closer to the sea than you do to the sky. Your world is driftwood and stone, sheep and song. When the wind blows too hard, and it always does, you imagine it's trying to steal your verses, to scatter them across the lava fields where no one will hear them again. There's a bitter beauty in that. A kind of resilience. You create art with fewer materials than a modern recycling bin, and yet your lines might outlast a volcano. Speaking of which, you're reminded that Iceland is also just one big tectonic tantrum. Occasionally, the earth rumbles beneath your feet like a grumpy stomach. Volcanoes belch ash into the sky, turning day into soot-covered night. And yet, people here still pause in the middle of grinding barley or tanning leather to recite something like, "The flame, tongue of winter, licks bone from the land, yet in fire's pale whisper the word still stands." That's not bad, you think. Needs tighter alliteration. But the mood is right. You whisper it aloud again, just to hear the vowels bounce off the turf walls. Quirky fact. In the rare patches where tiny birch trees still survive, Icelanders sometimes name them. Not whole forests, individual trees, You imagine walking up to the only tree in a valley and giving it a pep talk. Hang in there, buddy. No pressure, but you're carrying the whole forest on your twigs. As you glance around your turf house, you realize the lack of trees has made everything feel compressed, internal, focused. There's no towering cathedral spire or grand oak to distract you. Just you, your words, and the steady crunch of frost outside. And maybe that's why poetry thrives here. It's not just a pastime, it's a container. A box for your thoughts, wrapped tight against the cold, stacked like firewood in your mind. Ready to be pulled out when the wind howls too loud, or the lamp burns too low. You pick up a piece of driftwood and imagine it as a book. Maybe someday someone will carve your verses into something like this. Maybe not. But tonight, you've made something out of nothing. Again. And in a place with no trees, that's its own kind of miracle. The sun hasn't shown its face in days. Maybe weeks. It's hard to tell. Time slips like butter on a hot pan, except nothing's hot around here. Still, there's a buzz in the turf house tonight. Someone stoked the fire a little higher with precious peat. The air smells like damp socks and enthusiasm. It's Saga Saturday. That's not what anyone calls it, officially, but that's what it feels like. The chores are mostly done. Fish gutted, wool carded, goats glaring, and now everyone gathers near the central hearth. Your grandmother plunks down on a carved stool. Her knees crack like old ships, but her voice, still sharp enough to cut ice, she begins. Her voice is low and steady. No theatrics, no pacing. Just the facts, grim, hilarious, heroic, sometimes all at once. You recognize the story immediately, the tale of Grettir the Strong. Big guy. Bad temper. Definitely Bathaverse. Banished from society for murders and general jerkitude. He spent his days sulking in caves and fighting ghosts. Literally. Icelandic sagas don't mess around. Everyone leans in. Even your little cousin stops picking his nose. The saga isn't just entertainment, it's memory. Oral history wrapped in drama. A living, breathing library without shelves. You've heard this story before, sure, but tonight there's a new detail. Grettir biting a ghost on the ear. That's fresh. Or is it? Historians still argue whether these sagas changed with every telling or were rigidly preserved. The truth. Probably both. People remember what they need and embellish what they want. Your uncle, ever the heckler, interrupts with a joke about Grettir's smell. Laughter rolls through the house like warm broth. Then someone tosses in a short poem, 4 lines, perfectly metered, mocking Grettir's hygiene in skaldic verse. Boom. Now it's a party. Because here, poetry and prose aren't separate worlds. They flow into each other like glacial melt into fjords. The sagas are studded with little verses, called Lossavisur, or loose stanzas. Tiny bursts of poetry in the middle of a brawl, or a death scene, or a love confession. Think of them as emotional punctuation marks. You've even got a few memorized. One about a dying warrior who composes a final stanza with a sword through his chest. Another about a girl comparing her suitor's beard to a haystack struck by lightning. These aren't gentle lullabies. They're vivid, strange, unapologetically specific, quirky detail. Some sagas were so beloved that families would fight over who got to tell them first at gatherings. Like, actual yelling matches over narrative rights. You imagine someone flipping over a stew pot in rage because they were interrupted during Enja Oz saga. Honestly fair. Tonight, your mind wanders as the tale continues. You picture Grettir trudging across a snowy ridge, muttering bitter verses to himself. Alone, but never wordless. And somehow you relate, because you've done that too. Not the ghost fighting, the trudging, the composing. The world outside your turf house may be stark and silent, but inside there are stories, and you're part of them. After the saga ends, Grettir dies badly. Again, there's a moment of silence, not sadness. Exactly. Reverence. These tales are older than most of the people here. They've survived blizzards, famine, political collapse, and that time the neighbor accidentally salted the sheep feed instead of the fish. Tragic. But the sagas endure. You wonder who first told this one. Chieftain. A shepherd. A bored teenager. Whoever it was, they spoke into the dark just like you do now. Their words rolled over frost and firelight, just like yours. And someone listened. And someone remembered. Later, as you huddle back into your sleeping nook, the story still echoes. You catch yourself murmuring a line or two, reshaping it in your head, trying to make it yours. That's how it works. You listen. You retell. You reshape. Not to deceive, but to keep the story warm. To make sure it doesn't freeze to death in the long night. And if that means Greta gets a bit smellier each winter, so be it. You wake to a strange sound, half snore, half hiccup. Turns out it's just your grandfather practicing rhyme schemes in his sleep again. Snow grow. No crow. Toe. He mutters before rolling over, pulling the blanket off the dog in the process. The poor mutt grumbles, but stays put. It's too cold to move, even for indignation. There's no sun yet, but the darkness is a little grayer than usual. Morning, probably. Maybe. Hard to tell. But you know what's coming, the long lull. That deep stretch of day when there's nothing to do and nowhere to go because, well, Iceland. And so, the neighbors arrive. No knock, just a brush of snow off cloaks, and a quick grunt of greeting. They pile into the main room like human baggage, shoulders dusted white, noses pink. One of them brings dried fish. Another pulls a flask of questionable honey wine from under her tunic. There's a subtle nod toward the fireplace. Someone mentions verse. Everyone lights up like a midsummer sun. It's word game time. You perch beside your cousin, who's already making smug faces. He won last week. The game is simple but brutal. One person starts with a line in skaldic meter. The next person must continue the verse, keeping the meter, alliteration, and structure perfectly intact. If they mess up, they're out, laughed out, gently mocked, sometimes lovingly booed. It's tradition. You clear your throat. Think fast. Your brain is cold and sleepy. You mutter, storm, serpent slithers o'er stone-shadowed ridges. A few heads nod. Not bad. You used a kenning, storm serpent, for wind. Classic move. And the alliteration's solid. You pass the torch. The next line comes from a red-cheeked neighbor with a love for dramatic flair, snaps the knight's neck with its silken whispers. Oh, spicy. Maybe too much. Your aunt raises an eyebrow. The room murmurs in approval. She's still in. Round by round, the verses coil into strange shapes, some noble, some silly, some flat, out incomprehensible. A few lines reference events from last week's sheep roundup. Others dip into myth. Someone rhymes volcano with bone snow. You're pretty sure that's not a real word, but no one cares. Historians still argue whether these impromptu poetry duels were actual games or just a sneaky way to prepare for public speaking, politics, or even warfare. In truth, probably all three. Because the best part of these games, you sharpen your wit, build your memory, and cement your reputation, all while sitting around half frozen with fish breath. Fringe fact, some medieval Icelanders were rumored to compose entire love poems using nothing but kennings. Imagine trying to woo someone by calling them the sun, mind of the wound healer. It sounds flattering until you realize you just called them a cheerful bandage. As the game goes on, you notice something delightful. The worst poet in the group, a wide-eyed teenager with a voice like squeaky leather, is also the funniest. His rhymes are clunky, his metaphors confused, but the room erupts in laughter every time he speaks. His verse about a frosty flatulence from mountain giants might be the highlight of the week. 'Cause here, you don't have to be perfect. You just have to show up, to play, to speak. Your grandfather finally stirs from his snoring throne and offers a line of his own. It's simple, direct, and crushingly elegant. Everyone hushes. The fire crackles. His voice is gravel dipped in honey. Words weigh warmly when wind wants them most. Mick. Dropped. A beat of silence. Then soft claps, a few sniffles, and a murmur of agreement. Even the dog lifts its head in approval before curling back into fur. You feel something then, not warmth, exactly, but a kind of shared fire. These little competitions, these games, they're not just for fun. They're insulation against the cold, against the dark, against the long, creeping sense that time is meaningless and winter might never end. You're not just keeping busy, you're keeping lit. And tomorrow, you'll probably do it again. Maybe you'll write a line that stumbles. Maybe you'll win. Maybe you'll call the sea, the soul, swallowing shimmer, giant, and someone will spit honey wine laughing. Whatever happens, your words will echo, if only for a night. And that's enough. You're still glowing from yesterday's poetry game. Yes, even the part where someone compared your rhyming skills to a seal flopping through snow. When something odd happens, two strangers arrive, not just neighbors or traveling monks, but serious types. They wear thick cloaks dusted with ice and carry long staffs. Their boots squeak with frost, and their voices are deep and practiced. You recognize them instantly, skalds, professional poets, which, yes, is a real thing here. They don't announce themselves with fanfare. One of them, a wary man with an eyebrow that could slice salmon, simply clears his throat and starts a verse. The room goes still. It's a praise poem directed at a chieftain no one here particularly likes, but it's so clever, so sharp, edged, and ornate that even the sheepdog seems impressed. This isn't casual rhyme. This is verbal armor. Skaldic poetry isn't just entertainment. It's a weapon. A tool of survival, politics, and sometimes vengeance. You've heard stories of poets who saved their lives by composing on the spot. Imagine this. You're kneeling in the snow, your head moments from being chopped off by a grumpy warlord. Your last hope. Impress him with a stanza. This actually happened. One poor soul, caught raiding the wrong farm, begged for mercy by launching into flawless verse. The warlord, amused and probably a bit flattered, let him go. Barely. Historians still argue whether these performances were spontaneous or memorized and tweaked. Either way, the pressure was real, and if you messed up, no second takes, no applause, just a very permanent silence. You sit close as the skalds continue. They weave references to Norse gods and heroes into their lines with effortless grace. Odin's ravens flap between metaphors. Thor's hammer becomes the sky's echo fist. Loki gets name dropped in an insult so layered it might take a week to unpack. Then, it gets spicy. One of the skalds pauses and directs a line, sharp, shimmering, unmistakably mocking, at your village's own chieftain. Oaf. You feel a collective inhale. That line was a challenge. Not of swords, but of status. The chieftain, a thick-set man with more beard than neck, doesn't move. He nods. Then slowly, carefully, responds with a stanza of his own. It's measured, snide, and very, very clever. Everyone relaxes. No blood tonight. Just burn. You suddenly realize why these verbal duels matter so much. In a world where physical violence is always an option, poetry offers a cleaner, safer outlet, but it's also more dangerous in its own way. A bad poem fades. A good insult in verse. It might follow someone for generations. Quirky fact. Some skaldic insults were so brutal they made it into law. Like, literally. If someone composed a defamatory verse about you, and it damaged your reputation, you could sue them. So yes, slander by stanza was a legal matter. Imagine showing up to a medieval court because someone called you cow-brained in perfect meter. And it wasn't just men. Women composed, criticized, and clapped back in verse too. More on that later, but for now, let's just say no one was safe from poetic roasts. You watched the skalds leave as quietly as they came, fading into the snowy dusk. You can still hear a few lines echoing in your mind. You whisper them under your breath, trying to memorize the cadence, the rhythm, the burn. Not because you want to insult anyone, but because in this world, verse is power. Reputation is built with syllables. Safety is measured in metaphor. You think about that the next time someone steps on your foot. You don't yell. You don't curse. You simply murmur. The foot, fumbler fumbles through frost like a fool. Not your best work. But the insult lands. The foot, fumbler stares, then laughs, you're learning. Night falls again. Not that it ever truly rose, but you've learned to sense the deeper dark. The one that silences the last bird call and turns the snow outside a kind of haunted blue. And tonight, there's a treat: hot milk. You didn't milk the cow. Someone else braved the cold, the slippery hooves, and the occasional bovine tantrum, but you did help warm the stones for the pot. The milk steams gently now, tinged with a dash of fermented whey. Yes, it smells weird. Yes, it tastes acquired, but it's warm, and it coats your throat like a wool scarf from the inside, along with its skyre. Thick, tangy, somewhere between yogurt and cheese. You scoop it with a wooden spoon and dip your stale bread into it, until it almost tastes like dessert. Almost. This is the good life, relatively speaking, and nothing pairs better with lukewarm dairy products than hero tales. The one on offer tonight, the Saga of the Volsungs, a crowd favorite. Full of dragons, cursed rings, love triangles, and the kind of family drama that makes your cousin's sheep theft look tame. You nestle close to the hearth as someone older, your aunt maybe, begins. Her voice is husky, tired, but charged with fire. She tells of Sigurd, the dragon slayer, of how he killed Fafnir and bathed in his blood, of how he could understand birds afterward, of how, of course, he got betrayed by someone close. It's always the way. But here's the twist: nobody's quite sure how much of this saga is Icelandic. It's Germanic in origin, passed along the Viking grapevine, until it found a permanent home in Icelandic memory. Historians still argue whether the Icelanders reshaped it, preserved it, or merely host it like a strange guest who never left. Either way, it feels like it belongs. You can almost see Sigurd crouching behind a snowdrift, bloodied sword in hand, muttering poetry at the sky. Quirky detail. In the story, Sigurd gains the ability to talk to birds after roasting the dragon's heart and burning his thumb. Honestly, the lesson seems to be, don't cook mythical body parts without gloves. Your younger sibling perks up. Dragons! Talking birds! Betrayal! It's better than bedtime. And as the tale rolls on, you see a quiet transformation in the room. Faces soften, eyes close. But not in sleep. This is reverence. Everyone here knows these stories, but hearing them again is like smoothing an old cloak across your lap. Comfortable. Familiar. Safe. You too. Feel the rhythm. The rise and fall of ancient beats. The predictability is part of the comfort. You know Sigurd's going to die. You know who's going to betray him. You still hold your breath anyway. And when the poem embedded in the saga appears, when Sigurd speaks in verse just before the treachery begins, something electric hums through the room. Fate furls like fire, in hands half knowing. A sword waits silent where lips keep glowing. Okay, you're paraphrasing. But the feel is right. It's mournful. It's cryptic. It's that eerie skaldic mix of prophecy and casual doom. And again, you wonder who wrote that. Was it passed down? Did someone improvise it once by firelight and it just stuck? Did some long, dead poet whisper it in a freezing cave and hope it would outlive him? You think of that as you finish your skyre. A chunk of it sticks in your teeth. You gnaw it loose with the edge of your spoon. Still halfway in Sigurd's world, because poetry doesn't just warm your body. It gives structure to chaos. These tales, full of betrayal and curses, somehow make the world feel less random. Like if Sigurd can face a dragon, maybe you can face tomorrow's sheep shearing, even if the sheep hate you. Someone adds a final stanza. Not part of the saga, but a tribute. You know the kind, short, sad, half humorous, had died by hand he'd held in trust, but dragons die. So must we just... A few murmurs, a chuckle from the corner. The fire dims to a glow, and in that hush you feel full, not just in your belly, but in your chest. Milk and myth. Skyr and saga, Icelandic comfort food at its finest. Your fingers hurt. Not a metaphor this time, actual, honest to Odin ache deep in your knuckles kind of pain. You've spent the morning trying to help carve runes into a slab of whale bone. It's a memorial of sorts. Someone's grandmother or someone's sheep? Honestly, the line gets blurry. Regardless, it's your job to etch words into frozen ivory with a blade no thicker than a fingernail. The cold doesn't help. Your breath fogs, your shoulders tense, and your hands feel like someone replaced your bones with gravel. You shake them out, bite your lip, and keep going. Because that's what poets do. They suffer. Heroically, quietly, often pointlessly. You squint at your line. The rhythm's right, but the kenning feels clumsy. Frost, blood of the sky, was supposed to mean snow, but now it sounds like some sort of dragon soup. You sigh. Kennings are weird. A kenning is a compound phrase that replaces a regular word with something more poetic. So instead of sea, you say road. Instead of sun, maybe it's ski's candle. These aren't just flowery flourishes, they're essential. Required, if you write plain Icelandic, people will think you're simple. If you don't layer your metaphors, like onions wrapped in riddles wrapped in ice, are you even trying? Historians still argue whether these kennings were a mnemonic device, a poetic flex, or just the side effect of drinking too much fermented shark. But they endure. You've got a whole head full of them now, like a mini thesaurus forged in snow and sarcasm. One of your favorites, battle, sweat, that's blood, gory sure, but it sticks. Another good one, shield tree, for a warrior. Because obviously a person who holds a shield is like a tree holding up branches of protection. Or something. Look, the logic gets bendy. You stab your bone, slab again, refining a curve. Your fingers scream. You think, not for the first time, that the poetry of this place is shaped not just by words but by weather. It's a cold language. Crisp, sharp, condensed. Like the breath you see when someone speaks it aloud. There's no room for ramble, no patience for filler. The verses here don't sprawl, they slice, like ice crystals forming on the edge of a blade. And the pain? It's part of it. You glance at your cousin, who's trying to write a love poem using only 4 kennings. It's not going well. He just described his crush as the thigh, storm of the cloak, whisper. Which sounds less like a romantic compliment and more like a very specific kind of weather disaster. Still, he presses on. We all do. Because crafting poetry in Iceland is like shaping firewood from frost. You work hard, you get splinters, and sometimes, if you're lucky, it burns bright for a few seconds. Quirky tidbit. Some medieval Icelanders believed that inspiration came from the gods, specifically Odin, who was said to have stolen the mid of poetry from a giant. Drinking it made you a skald. Unfortunately, since you don't have access to magical mead, all you have is sour ale and sore wrists. You finish your stanza. It's short, bitter, and probably too bleak for a funeral about a sheep, but it rhymes. You stand back and read it again. Frost, fleece fallen, wind's wool unwound. Now silence binds the hoofless ground. You can almost hear the sheep approving. Or maybe that's your stomach growling. Either way, the ache in your fingers softens a bit. You did it. You turned pain into poetry again. It's not grand, or legendary, or even particularly kind, but it's yours. You blow on your hands, stuff them into your tunic, and head back inside. Later, as the fire crackles and someone plays a low, tuneless hum on a bone flute, you whisper your verse again. Just to yourself. Just to hear it out loud. It doesn't chase away the cold, but it reminds you that you're still here. The room is smoky again. Not dramatic banquet, all smoky, just the usual sheep, tallow lamp burning weird, fire pit coughing every time someone opens the door, someone's boot drying a little too close to the embers. The air tastes like charred wool and boiled root vegetables, but you don't care. Because tonight, you're sharing your poem. Not just mumbling a few lines to your cousin while pretending to look for spoons. No, this is full audience mode. Everyone's here, your family. The neighbors. The same dog that barked during your last stanza root. You clutch your seal skin scrap with sweaty fingers. Your voice trembles. You begin. It's a short piece, skaldic meter. Tight, precise, full of twisty kennings and overwrought alliteration. You practiced it all day, and it starts strong. The rhythm holds. People lean in. But then you fumble. You mix up sea steed and swan road. Common mistake. Both mean ship, but one is slightly more refined. The room pauses. You freeze. Did anyone notice? Of course they did. There's a little cough from your aunt. Your cousin raises one eyebrow. The dog tilts its head like you just recited a recipe instead of a lament. You flush. That's when the critiques start. Gently, at first. Your uncle says your third line was soon expected, which is Icelandic for confusing. Your neighbor suggests you try a different alliterative pattern next time. Perhaps, instead of your grandfather mumbles something about too many sky words. It's brutal, and it's tradition. Historians still argue whether medieval Icelanders were truly this nitpicky, or whether the saga writers exaggerated the literary one-upmanship. But given how obsessed everyone seems with structure, wordplay, and etymology, you believe it. The turf house may be falling apart, but heaven forbid someone use a tired kenning. And yet, there's affection under the critique. Nobody tells you to stop. Nobody scoffs or sighs. They care enough to engage, to dig in, to argue over the placement of a metaphor like it's a chess move. Quirky fact. There were actual competitions, known as Manvitsbreka, or the slope of man's wit, where poets would challenge each other, not just with content, but with sheer technical difficulty. Can you make a verse using only words with double meanings? Can you make the entire poem about love and murder simultaneously? Yes. Yes, they could. And yes, someone would always take it too far. Tonight, after the critiques subside, someone shares their own verse. It's about a horse that betrayed its rider by slipping on ice. Funny, sarcastic, wildly over the top. The horse is called Hoof, Gesture of the Frost King. Everyone laughs. You realize this is the game. You put something out into the world, however shaky, and then brace yourself. Because Icelandic poetry isn't precious, it's not kept behind glass. It's kicked around like a fish barrel, sniffed at, tested, even mocked until it proves its worth. And if it breaks, you write another. You sneak a glance at your verse again. It's still there. Still legible. Still yours. The critiques didn't erase it. They sharpened it. You start to see what they meant. Line 3 really does sag. Line 5 repeats a rhythm you used yesterday. The kenning in line 2. Storm. Tears of the Cloud Beast. Okay. Yeah, that might be too much. But you're proud. You did something ancient and ephemeral and somehow durable. You took a thought from your own frostbitten skull and offered it to the crowd. And they didn't laugh you out of the room. Well, not entirely. You think of the old Icelandic saying, better the unkempt verse than silence. It's comforting. Encouraging, even. You whisper it to yourself as you shuffle toward your blanket. And as you curl up, still flushed from critique, you quietly begin composing something new. Just a few lines. Just a seed. Because you're not done yet. You didn't expect politics to show up with parchment and ink. But here it is, unfolding right in front of you in the dimmest corner of the longhouse. The scribe, a monk in borrowed furs, dips his quill into a walnut, dark ink pot, and begins copying a verse. Not his verse. Not your verse. Someone else's. Someone important. Or at least someone with enough clout to pay for vellum. You hover nearby, pretending to sweep ash. But really, you're watching. Because this is rare. Vellum isn't just paper. It's animal skin turned canvas, one hide at a time. A single sheet can cost more than a cow. Writing on it is a luxury. Preserving poems on it, almost unthinkable. Which is why you're holding your breath. The monk writes slowly, carefully. Each stroke of the quill curls like frost on a window. You recognize the lines. It's a praise poem for a chieftain. One you've heard recited in gatherings. Bold, flattering, uncomfortably exaggerated. And maybe not quite right. The version being copied doesn't match what you remember. There's a line missing, or altered. Instead of calling the chieftain fire, bearer of the fjord lands. It now says, Peace, Lord of the Tide rings. Huh. Historians still argue whether these tweaks were accidental, intentional, or politically motivated. But here in the shadows of a smoky turf house, the answer feels obvious. Someone powerful wanted a gentler legacy, or a more convenient one. This isn't just poetry, it's propaganda. You feel a little sick. The idea that words, your precious, painstaking syllables, could be edited by someone else. It's like hearing a song you wrote sung in the wrong key, or watching your sheep get repainted and passed off as someone else's. And yet, it happens. You whisper a line to yourself from one of the older, unedited stanzas. The sea breaks stones, but ink, the soul. The monk glances up. You go back to sweeping. Quirky fact: some Icelandic manuscripts have faint corrections and margin notes that suggest disputes between scribes. One volume even has what might be an insult scrawled between the lines. This is not how Snorri said it, fool. You'd laugh if it weren't so familiar. You sit with the feeling for a while. The knowledge that no matter how clever your poem, it may not reach the future unchanged. That somewhere, someone might smooth your sharp edges, round out your metaphors, soften your insults, or worse, they might improve it. That last thought hits hardest. Later, you overhear the monk talking to your uncle. He's collecting verses for preservation, compiling them into a manuscript. Names might be attached, or not. Versions might get consolidated. The strongest lines will survive, he says. As if words are trees, and only the tallest will weather the storm. You think of your own verses, the ones that didn't land, the ones people laughed at, the ones that got picked apart, one syllable at a time. Were they weaker, or just rower? You don't know. But you know this: when the ink dries, your words are no longer yours. They become artifacts, tools, weapons, sometimes. Lies, sometimes. The warm breath of their origin forgotten. You sigh and whisper a new stanza. Quietly. Just for yourself. I carved in cold, but flame touched none. They'll write it warm and claim it sun. You don't stop writing. But now, you're careful what you give away. It starts with a sheep. Most disasters here do. You're outside, half buried in snow, trying to coax a runaway ewe back into the pen. She's not cooperating. She makes a sudden lurch, your foot slips, and you land face first in a snowdrift. From behind you, someone laughs, loudly. By dinner, you're the subject of a verse, a biting one. The line goes, the frost, loper falls flat, fleece lost in folly. It's got a good ring to it, a little too good. People snicker. Someone claps. The dog barks approvingly. And you smile through gritted teeth. Because here in Iceland, even your most embarrassing moments are fair game for poetry. Petty feuds don't start with fists. They start with 4 lines. You've entered the age-old tradition of nunziavi sir insult verses. Not just playful teasing, but full, on verbal combat with structured meter and metaphorical venom. And now you have a choice: respond with silence, a form of surrender, or fire back with your own cutting verse. You choose violence, the poetic kind. You spend the next few hours crafting something sharp but clever. It needs to sting, but not cross the line into slander. If you accuse someone of cowardice or worse, cow love, you'd better be able to prove it. Medieval Icelandic law takes defamatory verse very seriously. Historians still debate just how legalistic these feuds were, but we know this: a single insult poem could spark a blood feud. A nunnie might travel across valleys, survive winters, and get woven into future sagas. Your words, if well aimed, could echo through generations like a goat with a grudge. You mutter as you work tea. The snow slip sings with clumsy cheer, yet witless sheep have wool to fear. Boom. Frosty, you test it on your cousin. She laughs, then immediately starts helping you edit it. Because in this culture, even revenge rhymes get a workshop pass. The next time the sheep laugher opens his mouth, you drop your stanza like a stone in a still pond. Heads turn. One person gasps. Another repeats the line, just to savor the alliteration. The target raises an eyebrow. You've scored a point. The feud escalates. For the next few days, verses fly like snowflakes. You roast each other's poetry skills, herding techniques, choice of footwear. Someone composes a line implying you, and a certain goat share unspoken affection. You retaliate with a stanza implying they can't count syllables without assistance. And through it all, the community watches like it's theater. Because it is. A soap opera in stanzas. A slow burn wrapped in rhyme. Quirky fact. In one recorded case, a feud began when one poet accused another of misusing a kenning. The accused responded not with a counter poem, but with actual violence, and then wrote a poem about it afterward. Because even assault isn't complete without a punchy closer. You manage to keep your feud verbal, for now, but it gets personal. One of your opponent's lines hits a little too close. Something about how you always quote better poets. You feel your pride crack, but then you stop. Not because you're out of lines, but because you're tired. Because you remember this isn't about winning. It's about warmth, engagement. The way a cutting line can sting and still bond. How even a mockery, if skillfully done, becomes a strange kind of respect. Later, you and your enemy sit together, watching the embers dim. You share a crust of bread. You recite a neutral poem about wind and fish and longing. No insults, just rhythm. They nod. You still owe me a stanza about the goat, they say. You smile. Maybe tomorrow. It's late. The kind of late that feels heavy, like the dark has weight and the air is made of wool. You're huddled near the hearth with a bowl of something chewy and pungent. It's gray. It jiggles. It might once have been shark. Welcome to Icelandic cuisine. Your mother watches you try not to gag and offers the gentlest of threats. Eat. It's good for you. You obey. The taste is somewhere between smoked gym sock and ammonia. But it's tradition. It's preserved, much like tonight's verse. Because tonight, you're hearing a woman's poem. Not just a line or two squeezed in between sagas, but a full verse. Maybe several. Composed and recited by one of the elder women in your longhouse. A wary matriarch with hair like iron straw, and a voice like dry parchment. Her delivery is sharp, her metaphors sharper. There's a hush when she speaks. Her verse isn't about battles or boats. It's about childbirth in winter. About cutting cords with stone knives. About watching the sea freeze over and praying the fishing nets don't snap. It's raw. Rhythmic. Unapologetically real. You're stunned. Because, truth be told, you didn't think women wrote poems like that. But they did. A lot. Historians still argue how much of medieval Icelandic poetry was composed by women, and how much of it simply got attributed to men later on. What's certain is this: women weren't silent. They composed love poems, lullabies, and lethal insults. Like the verse you hear next. It's a biting response to a male poet who accused the speaker of being cold-hearted. The woman's reply: "Let frost kiss fire, and know its match. This hearth holds heat your words can't hatch." Oh. The room reacts with a slow, satisfied rumble. Even the dog shifts, impressed. Quirky detail. One legendary poetess, J.K. Run Skialodmar, literally J.O. Run the Poet Maiden, wrote entire political commentaries in verse, calling out kings for cowardice. She's mentioned in Heimskringla, a saga written by Snorri Sturluson, who apparently had enough sense to not take credit for her stanzas. Tonight, you see why. The matriarch continues. She's old, yes, but her verse doesn't dwell on age. It touches on grief, on hunger, on the quiet power of patience. You hear lines about sewing wounds and mending cloaks, about losing 3 brothers to the sea, and still remembering the sound of their laughter. You feel every word. Then, softly, she adds a verse about her husband. Gone 10 winters now. The sea took voice and left me soundless, but still I speak in echoes boundless. You don't look around. You don't have to. The silence says enough. Even the fire seems quieter now. This is what poetry can do. Not just entertain, not just insult, but honor, remember, transform. And in a world where women do most of the unglamorous labor, cleaning fish, patching boots, keeping infants from freezing, Poetry is power. A chance to speak back, to take control of the narrative, one kenning at a time. You feel inspired. You jot down a few lines of your own, about mothers as stormwalkers, about their hands as thread wolves, binding together what frost tries to break. Later, you'll show it to her. Maybe, if you're feeling brave. For now, you finish your bowl of fermented shark with a newfound sense of respect, because if she can serve that and still write poetry that makes grown men blink fast and stare at the floor, you've got work to do. The wind howls so loud tonight it sounds like it's reciting its own verse. Long, whistling lines that rattle the shutters and sneak through every crack in the turf. You're wrapped in every layer you own, including a scarf that smells faintly of smoked fish, but your nose still feels like a brittle icicle. You need firewood, desperately, but there's none. Then you remember you know a guy. He's not a chieftain. He's not even particularly nice, but he's got a stack of driftwood tucked in his shed, and he has a weakness, flattery. So, you brave the storm. You knock on his door. He opens, raising an eyebrow. You don't beg. You don't barter. You recite. The stanza is quick practiced and just indulgent enough. See, savor, drift, bringer, your kindness warms cliffs. Let no hearth suffer where your name drifts. There's a pause. Then, he smirks. You leave with 3 damp logs and mild frostbite in your left toe. Because here in Iceland, poetry isn't just art. It's currency. Praise. Poetry is an ancient, slippery kind of transaction. You compose a flattering stanza, perform it in public, and in return, you might get a cloak, a meal, or even land. Not immediately, of course. But reputation has weight, and good verse carries farther than footsteps. Historians still debate how formal these exchanges were. Was praise always expected to be paid back? Or was it just social glue, unstated, slippery, but powerful? Probably both. Icelanders valued honor more than gold, and a well-placed poem could polish a tarnished reputation like nothing else. You start to see it everywhere. Someone recites a verse about their neighbor's beautiful fishing net. Suspiciously beautiful, given how tangled it looked last week. Later, that neighbor shares extra trout. Coincidence, please. You hear a man singing about his cousin's generosity. That same cousin, accidentally, leaves behind a pair of wool mittens later that day. Poetry, as payment is so normalized here, people barely pretend it's not transactional. And why not? There's something charming about it. A society where praise holds real value, where cleverness warms your feet. Quirky fact. Some poets even earned lifelong support from powerful leaders in exchange for regular praise. One skald, Go Rarin Loftunga, received land, livestock, and legal protection for composing verses flattering King Ho Far. That's the medieval Icelandic equivalent of a 10-year brand sponsorship. But not all poetic bartering is so grand. One time, you wrote a half-decent poem about your neighbor's soup. Just 3 lines. You made it sound like ambrosia served in the halls of Valhalla. She blushed, laughed, and gave you an extra bowl the next night. Best soup of your life. Of course, there's a dark side. If praise is payment, bad poetry can be seen as theft, or worse, insult. You hear about a traveler who flubbed a stanza while honoring a local chieftain. Misused a kenning, called him ox-footed, instead of battle, sturdy, awkward. He wasn't invited back. You make a mental note to double check every metaphor, especially when firewood's on the line. Tonight, you craft another poem, this one about the seal, fat candles your aunt makes. It's funny, self-deprecating, and full of alliteration. She laughs until she wheezes, and hands you the biggest piece of dried cod from the pantry. You've paid for dinner with verse. You're officially a poet. Merchant now. You tuck yourself into your sleeping nook with a full stomach and a half-frozen smile. You whisper your stanza to yourself one more time. O flame, feeder, fat, flasker, your wicks defy storm. In your hands, the night burns soft and warm. Not bad. Maybe tomorrow you'll write something about mittens. You've heard the name 100 times, maybe more. Whispers in Sagas. Jokes in verse. Accusations, praises, odd facts. Tonight, you meet the man himself, Snorri Sturluson. He's not what you expected. There's no glowing aura, no raven perched on his shoulder, just a thick-set man with calculating eyes, a slightly amused smile, and a head that seems, well, huge. Not metaphorically, physically. The man looks like he's storing extra sagas in there for safekeeping. Snorri's visiting your settlement for reasons that are technically political but functionally poetic. He's compiling knowledge, collecting verses, interviewing old poets, and, according to the gossip, subtly positioning himself for more power. It's hard to tell where the historian ends and the schemer begins, but when he speaks, people listen. He talks about Skada Lodskaparmal, his great poetic handbook. It's basically the Icelandic version of a rhyming dictionary crossed with a Norse myth encyclopedia. A how to guide for skalds who want to level up their verse game. Because yes, Snorri believes poetry has rules. Many, many rules. You listen as he describes kennings like a chef explaining spices. Odin must be referred to with his correct poetic names. Blood is never just blood. It's battle's wine, or won't see. Ships are sea steeds. Warriors are sword trees. And if you ever get confused, there's a chart, a literal chart. He's codifying creativity. And somehow you don't hate it. Historians still argue whether Snorri preserved skaldic tradition or reshaped it to suit his own legacy. He certainly enjoyed framing himself as the poetic authority, and maybe he was. But tonight he doesn't come across as arrogant, just methodical, curious, and maybe a little smug. You ask him a question, nervously, something about whether a certain kenning for snow is overused. He chuckles. Snow can be anything, if you haven't used it that way before, he says. Then he adds, just don't call it white. Quirky fact, Snorri's book doesn't just list poetic terms, it embeds them in mythology. If you want to know why gold is called Freyja's tears, you have to read a whole tale about gods, giants, and a necklace. It's like sneaking vegetables into a stew. Educational nutrition hidden in flavor. Later, someone challenges Snorri to recite a poem on the spot. He declines. Politely. Says his mind is full of other people's words these days. But you notice the smile twitch at the edge of his lips? He probably has a dozen stanzas lined up, just in case. As he prepares to leave, you offer him something. A simple verse you wrote about ice melting from rooftops. It's not groundbreaking, but it's tight, clean. You worked on it all week. He reads it, pauses, nods. Keep writing, he says. You float the rest of the evening. Because this is the man who's rewriting how poetry survives, who's turning Iceland's oral tradition into something that fits between covers. He's part archivist, part poet, part politician. And maybe, deep down, you worry he'll edit too much. Smooth out the wild edges. Turn the living, muttered verses of frozen turf houses into academic footnotes. But tonight, he praised your poem. And that's enough to keep your heart warm, even after he vanishes into the snow. You whisper your stanza one more time, just to be sure it still holds. From thatch slides the sky's last whisper. Drip song of thaw, hope's pale sister. You don't need a chart for that one, but Snorri might include it anyway. You're staring at a cow. Not because she's interesting. She's not. She's chewing cud with the glazed focus of someone who's never written a verse in her life. But because you've run out of metaphors for snow, and your brain is melting faster than a spring glacier, it's time to bind a book. Your village has decided, finally, to gather the best of its oral verses and carve them into permanence. Not just loose stanzas scratched on bone or muttered by firelight, but actual sagas, leather, bound. Organized, a legacy you're helping. Step 1. Parchment. The calfskin arrives stiff and pale. You help stretch it on a wooden frame, scraping it smooth with a half moon blade until your arms go numb. The smell is unique, like wet leather and regret. But when it's done, it's beautiful, thin, almost translucent, and absurdly precious. Next comes the ink. You boil moss, scrape soot, Whisper prayers to the gods of legibility. You test strokes on driftwood before committing them to the real stuff. One smudge, one blot, and a week's work is ruined. No pressure. You're not the main scribe. Thankfully. That job falls to a near silent man whose hands move like thought. But you do get to choose some verses. Yours? Your grandmother's? Your cousin's insult poem about goats? It all goes in. And as the saga takes shape, you feel a strange mix of pride and fear. Because once it's written down, it stops changing. All those little mutations. The forgotten words, the regional variations, the improvised verses under moonlight. They freeze. Ink fossilizes sound. It preserves, but it also pins. It remembers, but only one version. Historians still argue whether this was a good thing. The written saga saved Iceland's poetic soul from oblivion, but they also ended the age of pure oral improvisation. Poetry became performance, then memory, then manuscript. Quirky fact: some scribes left doodles in the margins. Tiny dragons, frustrated faces, inappropriate stick figures. One even wrote, "This work is long. God help me." You feel that in your soul. The book grows heavy. You bind it with wool, threaded cords, and a leather cover, dyed dark with soot and seal. Fat. It smells like storms and campfire stories. You add one final verse on the last page. Not your best, but sincere. Words from frost. Ink from ash. May silence break where voices clash. You don't sign it. No one does. Because this book isn't about ego. It's about memory. It's a lifeboat in a sea of snow. And as you run your fingers across the cold leather, you think of all the verses lost before this. Murmured by mothers, shouted in battle, whispered into driftwood. Gone now. But not these. These, at least, are safe. Until the next volcano. The ash is falling again. Soft, gray flakes drift from the sky like burnt snow. It's not a blizzard. Not this time. It's a distant eruption. One of Iceland's many simmering mouths has opened, and exhaled a story no poet can shape. You step outside, muffled in wool, and tilt your face to the sky. The air smells like sulfur and silence. The flakes gather in your hair, your sleeves, the folds of your tunic. They feel like endings. But inside your head, the verses begin anyway, because this is what you do. When the world shakes, you rhyme. When the sea swallows the boats, and the sheep wander into oblivion, you reach for meter. Not because it fixes anything, but because it names the moment. Wraps it, holds it still. Tonight, as the ash thickens and the sky turns a bruised pearl, your family gathers again in the longhouse. You all move a little slower. Even the dog seems pensive. Someone begins to speak. Not new words, old ones. Familiar. A saga. And halfway through, another voice joins. Then a third. You all know this one by heart. The tale of a traveler who crossed lava fields to deliver a single stanza, only to die with soot in his lungs. You whisper the verse with them. Fire's tongue licks roads, but feet must go. Where word is flame, we follow slow. It's not about winning. It never was. Icelandic poetry is about endurance, repetition, the stubborn magic of speaking into a storm. You remember a line your grandmother used to say, "A story told twice becomes a fire. Told thrice, it stays warm forever." You never understood it as a child. Now, with ash on your sleeves and verses in your breath, you do. You look around the room, smoke curling through lamplight, frost etching the edges of the glass, your cousin quietly mouthing his next poem beside the hearth. You don't say anything. You don't have to. The warmth is in the words. The story goes on. Now the fire dims. You can almost hear the snow piling on the roof, the hush between gusts, the faint creak of old wood remembering warmer summers. You've come a long way. Through sagas and storms, rhyme games and rivalries. You've sat beside chieftains and outlasted volcanic ash. You've tasted fermented shark, whispered verses into oil lamp shadows, and watched your own words etched into calfskin. Let it settle now. Feel the slow rhythm of breath matching the meter of your favorite verse. Let the imagery blur into a soft glow. Kennings melting like snowflakes. Metaphors folding into dreams. The long night doesn't seem quite so long anymore. Not when it holds stories. Not when it holds you. The house is quiet now. The dog is finally asleep. Someone's hand rests gently over a finished stanza. Someone else breathes evenly beneath a moss-stuffed blanket. You did it. You kept the fire. With your words, your voice. The cold might come again, but so will the poems. Let the last line drift through your thoughts like smoke curling into sky. Where frost forgets, our lines remain. In silence sung, like falling rain. Close your eyes. Let the verse hold you. You're warm now. You're home.